What's up, y'all? I am re recording my talk from Schelling Point Denver, which was given on March 2nd, 2023. Apparently, the videos from the main stage were lost this year. No big deal, it happens. And this is my re record of my talk. So, the title of my talk is 7 New Form Factors for Quadratic Funding. I'm going to talk about why, what, and how we've taken Gitcoin's new grant stack and put it into new forms of quadratic funding. So if you are not familiar with me, I'm Kevin Owocki. I am co-founder and CEO of Supermodular, which is a regen venture studio. We have spun out such projects in the ecosystem as Kernel, which is an educational community for Web3, and Gitcoin, which is a DAO that focuses on public goods. So I'm disaffiliated from Gitcoin and no longer involved with leadership at Gitcoin, but Supermodular does build on top of Gitcoin's new grant stack, which is a credibly neutral protocol for quadratic funding and other coordination mechanisms. And we also build on other things like hypercerts we've been playing with. So that is me. The agenda for this talk is quadratic funding. So there are lots of fun quadratic funding form factors available. We'll talk on what that is, why it's powerful, and then how Supermodular has built them on top of Grant Stack and Allo Protocol, Gitcoin's new protocols. And I just want to highlight that Supermodular is an early innovator in this ecosystem. So when I was giving this talk live, I asked how many people know what quadratic funding is just by show of hands, and about 2/3 of the audience raised their hands. Basically, with quadratic funding, a matching pool is raised. On Gitcoin, typically it's been between $1 million and $3 million, and then a crowdfunding campaign is matched according to the QF algorithm. And basically, the crowdfunding campaign it is matched by the matching pool, but the number of contributors matters more than the amount funded. So if person A raises $100 from one contributor and person B raises $100 from 100 contributors, then person B gets way more of the matching pool. So this is really powerful because it pushes power in these ecosystems, decentralized ecosystems, away from whales and other central power brokers and to the edges, to the everyday ecosystem members, which creates more democracy in public goods funding decisions. So that's why quadratic funding is powerful, and I continue to build on top of quadratic funding because we want to build a decentralized ecosystem where the preferences of the many outweigh the needs of the rich and the few. So the scope of this talk is quadratic funding and then new form factors for quadratic funding. And by form factors, what I mean is different ways of packaging up a quadratic funding like mechanism. So when I was giving this talk at Schelling Point, I said, raise your hand if you have a laptop, and everyone raised their hands. Raise your hand if you have a phone. Everyone raised their hands. It's really just a test audience engagement there. But we've become habituated to different form factors of computing in regular computing. But this is what we're talking about here with quadratic funding, is finding a new form factor for quadratic funding that isn't just a crowdfunding style Kickstarter site. So basically, the traditional form factor that we're all used to with quadratic funding is Gitcoin grants. It feels like a crowdfunding, like a Kickstarter type experience. There's another really great project out there that I highly recommend called ClearFund that also does quadratic funding in a crowdfunding type experience. And we are looking at new form factors for quadratic funding in this talk. And this is all enabled by Gitcoin Grant Stack and Allo Protocol. Now we have Grant Stack, which is a protocol for doing quadratic funding, and Gitcoin Passport, which is a part of Grant Stack and does Sybil resistance, helps with the one human, one vote aspects of quadratic funding. And now we can build new application layers and new UI layers, new form factors for quadratic funding. So without further ado, let's get into the 7 form factors for quadratic funding that we've built. First form factor for quadratic funding that we've built at Supermodular is a mobile quadratic voting experience. So basically the hypothesis here is that quadratic funding and quadratic voting could look really interesting in a mobile experience. So we built a QF QV mobile game that you could play at an exhibition hall, such as Schelling Point. And the idea is that both exhibitors arrive at an event and the attendees arrive at an event and receive QR codes. Attendees wander the exhibition hall and they can cast votes for their favorite exhibitors. At the end of the event, the organizers know which exhibitors are a hit because of the experience with the quadratic voting game. So basically, everyone at Schelling Point in the audience got a QR code, which was a QR code that gave them some amount of vote credits. They enter in their ENS names from the into the QR code, and then from there they're able to scan QR codes from the exhibitors at Schelling Point that they think are a hit. And so I'm actually using this experience, this mobile quadratic voting experience, to allow the audience to live vote on which of the form factors for quadratic funding we think are the most powerful. So again, this talk is about 7 different form factors for quadratic funding. We've taken Gitcoin's new grant stack and created a new way to interact with quadratic funding that is built on top of Gitcoin grant stack. And the first project that we've built is this project called Quadratic Honey, which is basically a mobile quadratic voting experience. And we are using Quadratic Honey to enable everyone to vote on which of the form factors for quadratic funding they think are the most powerful ones. So using quadratic voting to vote on which quadratic funding projects are the best. So turning quadratic funding on itself. So at this point in the Schelling Point talk, the audience was all holding up their phones and was voting for which quadratic funding experiences they thought were the best. If you wanted to vote for Project 1, you could scan this QR code. All right, projects Q2 and 3, a quadratic funding social network. So basically the hypothesis here is that social media is broken because social media relies too much on likes to upregulate content that is good for the social network. So basically you go on Twitter, you like something, if it gets enough likes, then it gets upregulated into the algorithm. But likes are kind of the ultimate shitcoin. There's infinite of them. Likes only measure what gives us a dopamine rush and not what we actually value as humanity or as individual humans. It's kind of like when you drive down the street and your attention is drawn to a car crash, then does that mean that you actually value the car crash, or does that mean that looking at the car crash just grabbed your attention? So that's kind of what social media is doing on a massive scale for humanity. What if we could find a better way to measure what people actually like? So I think that microtips might be a way of measuring what people actually value with in social networks. But the thing is that no one really cares about a 30 cents microtip, right? But microtips with quadratic funding could be a new way for people to earn a living by living on social media and just being helpful. And, you know, just an early anecdote from the Gitcoin days in 2019, I actually built this into the Gitcoin news feed. We had a Twitter-like experience where people could post about their grants or anything related to Gitcoin. And it was a pretty active social network at the time. And I wanted to upregulate the content that was actually helpful to people on the network, to what contributed to the public good of the Gitcoin network. And so we started experimenting with microtips and then quadratic funding on top of those microtips in a social network like experience. And I can't tell you, people went from posting memes and just funny GIFs to actually being helpful on the network. We kind of decentralized customer support because people all of a sudden could make $10 at a time just by posting and being helpful to each other on the network. So I've seen this in action, and it was that hypothesis that enticed us to build a quadratic funding social network on Discord and on Lens Protocol. So Magic Powered helped out with the Discord one, and Raid Guild helped out with the Lens Protocol. So this is a demo of what the Lens Protocol fork that we built looks like. So right now we're quadratically tipping someone based off of a post that we see here on Lenster. So basically tipping in line next to likes on Lenster, which is, as you know, a Web3 social network. Another thing that we've started doing is building. If you want to vote for Project 2, which is quadratic funding on Lenster, you can do that here. Another thing that we've done is we built a quadratic funding social network into Discord. So this is something that I've been working on with Magic Powered, which is a dev consultancy shop. They did a great job on building a QF tipping bot. So basically live in the Discord of your DAO, you can actually play with quadratic funding live in where the social town square of your DAO is. So the big idea behind a quadratic funding social network is, what if we could fund public goods in where the town square of humanity is? People spend hours per day on Twitter and hours per day on Facebook. What if the people who are hanging out in the town square and providing value to each other in the town square could actually make money from doing that? So we've built that on Lenster, which is project number 2. You can vote here. And we've built that on Discord, which is project number 3, and you can vote here for that. All right, next project that we've built on top of Gitcoin Grant Stack and a new form factor of quadratic funding is a QF card game. So basically the hypothesis here is that if we strip away the technical complexities and make a fun and fast way to engage with QF ideas, we can speed run the design space of what's possible in quadratic funding. So I've been working with a contributor in the Gitcoin ecosystem named McKennedy on a QF card game, and this is basically the way it works. So you're given a deck of cards, you distribute the cards amongst a group of players, and anyone who has a matching pool can put it down on the board. So in this example, we've got open source, which has contributions times 100 in it, decentralized science, which has contributions times 10, and DEI matching pools. And then from there, players are encouraged to play a grant card in whatever matching pool they want to compete in. So in this example, grant cards for the yellow player, the red player, and the green player, and the purple player are being played. And from there, the game actually starts, and people can contribute to their favorite grants and try to earn points by contributing to the public goods that they care about. But, you know, one of the big problems with quadratic funding is Sybil attacks. So basically, how do we know that you're not making up new identities in order to contribute to your grants? And so we've introduced a game dynamic called Passport, which basically challenges people who have played contributions into grants to as to whether or not they're a Sybil attacker or not. So in this example, the player has played 3 cards face down, and the passport card was played challenging that those are all real contributors. And it turns out that 2 of the contributors were regular contributors, and 1 was a Sybil attacker. So according to the rules of the game, that player loses a turn, and the person who played the passport card gets to play the passport card again. So just playing with the OODA loop of quadratic funding here, the design space of quadratic funding. How do we observe how well quadratic funding is working? How do we orient on how we want to change it? How do we decide what changes to make and act on which changes we want to make? By being able to speed run in a 10-minute game what the quadratic funding experience is like, we're able to spin this OODA loop way faster. So the second part of the game, the inside part of the game is actually just playing the quadratic funding game, but the outer loop of the game is designing new Sybil defense mechanisms and scoring mechanisms. So basically, the game comes in stock with, or not in stock, out of the box with one type of Sybil defense mechanism and one type of scoring algorithm, and players are encouraged to make up their own scoring algorithms and their own Sybil defense mechanisms in order to change the parameters of the game to spin the OODA loop faster of how we design quadratic funding. So a lot of people don't know this, but this was, but Monopoly, the game that we all know and love from Hasbro, used to be a much more democratic version of the game. But the parameters of the game were changed to make it more monopolistic so that people could win faster by dominating their opponents, as opposed to going down a co-op route. So the design space of the quadratic funding game right now on Gitcoin and other projects like CLR Fund only spins like every 3 months or so. Only goes through the OODA loop every month or so. What if we could go through it 10 minutes at a time and speed run the evolution of quadratic funding? That's Project 4. If you want to vote for Project 4, you can scan that QR code and vote for it. Alrighty, home stretch. Project 5, non-EVM QF grants. So I've been working with a contributor named Eason Chai, who is helping us build a product called simplegrants.xyz. So basically, the idea here is that people who aren't on the EVM will want to do quadratic funding also. So what if we built a simple modular grant giving tool that can plug into non-EVM payment mechanisms, BTC, Zcash, US dollars. And I've got a long list of potential customers for this that want to do quadratic funding for their ecosystems. And so we may be deploying simple grants in order to service that need. So this is basically a form factor of quadratic funding that doesn't require the Ethereum virtual machine at all, and will be something that we can do in our local communities if we want to use quadratic funding and take it out of the blockchain niche. Those of you who have been following my career for a while know that we did a quadratic funding experiment in downtown Boulder, in which in July of 2020, the coronavirus pandemic had just hit. Downtown businesses had lost 99% of their foot traffic due to the coronavirus pandemic, and we were able to help them pay rent with a quadratic funding round that paid for $43,000 worth of their rent, which is enough to do a month or two of rent for a lot of the downtown businesses that participated in our quadratic funding round. So we had about, I think it was 200 contributions across 5 downtown businesses, and these were not digitally native businesses. This was a comic book shop. This was a yoga studio. This is a bookstore that we were able to do quadratic funding with. So super proud that we were able to prototype quadratic funding and show that it works outside of the blockchain niche. And Simple Grants is going to allow us to do that in a repeatable way with a repeatable code base. So if you think that's a good idea, then please vote for Project 5. Alrighty. Another experiment that we've been working on is a data-driven QF analysis tool. So basically providing new ways to present the data that comes out of quadratic funding to the audience, to an audience. So basically people, especially fraud analysts, want a data-driven way to visually analyze grants rounds. So what we've done is we've built this little grants data analysis tool that allows you to look at any grants round that's been run on Gitcoin Grant Stack and to analyze the structure of the contributions to that grant round. So basically, this is the Ethereum infrastructure round that was just run in February, and you can see all of the contributions that have been made to different grants in that round: Chainlist, Optimism, L2B, and you can compare the size of those contributions and the contributors who contributed to multiple grants in that grant round to each other using this visual interface, which is a launching off pad to validate assumptions about whether there's been Sybil attackers, whether there's been collusions, and things of that nature. If you want to vote for Project 6, you can do that here. Last but not least, I've been working with Bliss, who is a contributor on the Supermodular team, on a partnerships protocol. Gitcoin Grants is a signal aggregation mechanism for the space. Uniswap and Yearn and OneInch are all alumni of Gitcoin Grants who got their first checks, or whatever the digital version of first checks are, on Gitcoin Grants. So the assumption here is that if we can build a signal aggregator for what projects are up and coming in the Ethereum ecosystem and serve those projects up to people who want to partner with the hottest up and coming projects in the space, then that's a source of signal, a source of alpha for the ecosystem. So we built a partnerships tool built on top of Grants Stack where people can find and contact each other. And what if we sold this deal flow to VCs and angels or to the top biz dev people in the Web3 ecosystem? So this is basically what it looks like. Let me press play here. So you load up different rounds on Gitcoin Grant Stack, and then you can visit different grants that were on that Grant Stack round. In this demo, we're just looking at Grants Hub and we're adding a couple sample projects to our cart. And then once we add those projects to our cart, you are able to generate a double opt-in intro to each of the projects in your cart from your email address to their email address. So if you both approve, then you're able to get an intro to the counterparty. So basically the idea is that once per quarter, if VCs or angels or biz dev people want to get access to the top projects in the Ethereum ecosystem, then we'll be able to generate that for them in this partnership tool. If you think that's a good idea, then please vote for Project 7. All right, so that's the agenda that we went through. There's lots of fun new QF form factors available. We can build them on Grant Stack and Allo Protocol. Supermodular is an early innovator in this ecosystem. At this point of the Schelling Point talk, I had people just take out their phones and just vote for which projects they thought were the most promising. And this is the results. So we used quadratic voting in order to vote on which quadratic funding projects were the most promising. And the QF analysis tool is the one that won. The QF mobile game got second, which is kind of fun because we're using the QF mobile game in order to do the voting overall. Partnerships Protocol got number 3. QF Card Game got number 4. QF Social Network on Discord got number 5. Simple Grants, and then Lens were the top voted projects on there. So this has been a super fun experience for me to build new things on top of GrantStack, to kick the tires on that protocol, and to explore what is possible when we take new form factors of the protocols that we know and love and make them available out to the world. So I am Kevin Owocki. I am co-founder of Gitcoin and founder and CEO of Supermodular. And this has been my talk. If you're interested in playing with any of these products that we built, please DM me on Twitter and I will give you an alpha build. And I'll see you at the next Schelling Point. Peace and love.